So I just say thank you ever so much for joining us and welcome to our third webinar in the NextOcean series. Today we'll be talking about co-designing the next generation of Earth observation-based fisheries and aquaculture services, where we hope to be able to produce meaningful and relevant solutions to problems the industry are facing today. By the end of the webinar, we hope that you will all be a bit more familiar with the concept of co-design and the different approaches that we can use to work together to define and address these most pressing issues that are facing in fisheries and aquaculture, and where Earth observation solutions could really make a difference. So Pedro Ribeiro from Plymouth Atlantic will be giving some background on co-design principles and techniques. And then Peter Miller from Plymouth Marine Laboratory, who leads our NextOcean work on co-design, we'll be talking about how we've implemented co-design approaches within NextOcean and invite you to become involved in future activities. So thanks again for joining us. Please sit back, enjoy the presentations. We will be taking questions at the end of each talk and have a longer discussion session at the end. So if you think of any questions as you're going on, please just type them into the chat and we'll try to answer them when appropriate. So for now, I'd just like to hand over to Pedro, please.
Okay, thank you, Dawn. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me into this webinar. I'll just share my screen and start our presentation here. Okay, so I'll try to make some introduction on participatory design for Earth observation. So trying to bring this topic to the project and what we're trying to do here before Peter moves on to a more specific description of the tasks and how we are implementing this in NextOcean. So at this stage, any participatory design, any design of new applications that we want to make for Earth observation data has to be done within the realm of these considerations of the global challenges that we're facing right now. So it's very clear that humanity is facing a lot of different challenges on global level. And this framework was presented in a good example of how this framework can be presented was offered by Rockstrom et al. So the Club of Rome, when they created the idea of the planetary boundaries, which are depicted here in this image. You can see that they classify different topics like climate change, chemical pollution, change in land use, and trying to estimate in how much have we overshooted the limit of what can be sustainable in the Earth system. So as you can see from the red bars, a lot of these limits have already been crossed. The thresholds have been crossed. Of course, people talk a lot about climate change and also about the biodiversity crisis, but you can see that there are other crises here that are quite critical, like the nitrogen cycle, the nutrient pollution. So it's just a way of calling the attention and understanding which are the issues that we need to address. And it's kind of quite daunting perspective, but on the other hand, it was the starting point for a lot of possible roadmaps that were developed to try to show some insight on how we can get out of those crises, how can we solve some of these issues. And a good example of those roadmaps is this one, which is the Donald framework, which was presented by Kate Raworth, this English economist. And she combined the idea of the planetary boundaries, which are still here in the image, with some social baselines that we have to have. So the idea is that humanity should be living within this donut figure, this green stretch here, which is provides all the social foundation, all the social conditions for all the humanity to be living in a fair and comfortable lives, but also at the same time respecting these planetary boundaries, so not overshooting those. And within these social aspects, is of course important to note that she has included a lot of socioeconomic aspects like income and work. So we of course need to respect these planetary boundaries, but on the other hand, we have to provide enough socioeconomic growth to have everyone in the planet living comfortable lives and in a fair system. This is also represented and was further developed by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So again, it's a roadmap, a framework that kind of shows the way in which we should develop new solutions, in which we should develop the technology. So in order to live in this sustainable life in the Earth system. So that's the framework within which any discussion has to be made for developing new applications. So what we're talking about Earth observation, and Earth observation has to be understood in this more very wide definition. So any form of observation of the Earth system. So this doesn't include only satellite data, but much more than that. Of course, all the in situ sensors, even the numerical modeling is a way of observing this Earth system. But it also goes way beyond, like using data from Internet of Things, using trace data from human activities. So vessel traceability, what we can do with AES system, or even person traceability that we can do with mobile phones, of course. And even consumer information. So when you have websites that can get information on how people are exploring the products or services that are available, how people are buying that, even that information can be considered Earth observation also, since humanity is a part of the Earth system. So it's a very wide definition, is of course a very complex task to aggregate all this information, but that's exactly what the new concept that has been very trendy in the discussions in the academic, the digital twin wants to build. So this wants to combine all this information in a tool for scientific discovery, and that allows us to simulate different pathways, different solutions from those roadmaps that I showed before. So different technological solutions, how they would affect this Earth system. That's the aim of these digital twins. And this is just starting now, but I think it's a very good pathway, and it's a good way to combine all this amazing quantity of data that's now available. And participatory design or co-design, what exactly is that? It's something that everybody's talking about. We heard a definition in the Living Planet Symposium now that was actually quite interesting, that co-design is almost like a teenage sex. Is something that everybody's talking about. Everyone wants to be a part of it, but nobody knows exactly what it is. So it's really a trendy topic, but it's a very complex one. So co-design is any kind of design that involves the stakeholders from the start in the design of a new service or a new product, new technology. And there are different techniques to do that. Basically, they undergo through this framework where you have telling activities, enacting activities, and making activities. And then you have a very wide range of techniques to use here. So a lot of different tactics and methods that have been developed and tested within very different projects in very different geographies or topics. As you can see, some of these techniques are in the interface of different parts of this framework. So it's very interchangeable. There's no really fixed way of doing this. There's a lot of different ways of doing. Basically, but you need to understand that you at some point have to understand the needs of the users. You may work with prototypes or mock-ups or this kind of things that helps users to understand the solution that is being developed, and also make the users to actually simulate the use of those solutions to actually understand how they work in their current daily activities, how they help them perform those activities, are they useful, so what can be improved. So it's a very complex process that can use a lot of different techniques and can run on different on several iteration cycles in different ways, in different directions. When it comes to Earth observation, this sort of activities becomes even more difficult, more challenging, because now we have a very complex ecosystem. We have a very distant relationship between the people that develop this kind of services and the people that are potential users of this kind of services. Actually, we also have a very complex ecosystems with several layers of users, several different communities here in the users community, distributors of data, aggregators of data. On the service provider side, you also have all the different communities, the builders of algorithms, the providers of data, the providers of infrastructure and platforms. So we have to combine all these different people to try to actually build a new solution. And this is challenge for sure. One of the reasons is because the value of these new solutions is not really clear for the users. On the other hand, the potential users of these new solutions are not always self-evident for the providers. So this becomes quite challenging. You can have, in a way, you can have a market pool where you have the users driving the development of the solution, but this kind of foster more specialization, so very solutions that are very useful for local challenges, but maybe not so easy to be scalable. On the other hand, you have a technology push also being done by service providers, which is always trying to push more generic solutions that can be adapted for all sorts of different environments or challenges, but on the other hand, might not be so much useful for the users. So a bit of how to solve these things is to actually consider users' reality from the start. So really understand how the services are to be used, how the results, which kind of results are expected from the applications from the start, and to put the service providers closer to the users' activities and the users' objective with the application. On the other hand, we also have to have a very good understanding of these ecosystems, how these services will be distributed among the different communities of users, and also on the other hand, how the service providers are connecting within their own communities. So all of this has to be considered in order to facilitate the participatory design of these solutions. And I think a very good takeaway is that you have to have a case-by-case attention here. In order to develop very effective and useful solutions, you really have to go all the way to the use case level. So you really have to understand a very particular challenge, or understand what is composed for, what are the different implications of the solution, the outputs that provides, are there ethical, political, economic implications that we are not considering. So we have to go well beyond the just technical part. Of course, then the next step is to understand what kind of solution can be developed, what is the best possible solution out there that we can implement in terms of Earth observation to fulfill some needs. Of course, we will need some funding for the development. So either this is provided by service providers, by the companies themselves, or we have to find this funding somewhere else in research projects or in other kind of resources. Then we, of course, will be doing this co-design activities. So this make, tell, act, and act cycle has to be implemented with different techniques. Once we have a developed system, we have to provide capacity building for these potential users so they can make the best use of these solutions. And finally, you've moved to operation. So anytime you have a new solution, you have to run this full cycle and really have the focus on the user. Here, I think the user is the boss, is the message here, that you have to be user-centric and look at the use case level to really have effective solutions. And of course, for doing that, as you can see, this is you will have to bring this large community together. So cooperation is the key word, and anything that you can do in that sense will be very, very much appreciated in the process. That's what I had for today. Thank you very much. I'll be available for questions in the end of the session also.
Thanks so much, Pedro. That was really interesting. I wonder if anybody's got any questions they'd like to ask Pedro right now before we move on to Peter's talk.
I've got one while other people are thinking, Pedro. On your final slide, you were talking about capacity building and how you could use co-design towards that goal. Can you tell me a bit more about how co-design helps us progress our capacity building goals?
Okay, thanks, Peter. It's quite interesting. The diagram I showed is of course trying to cover a very wide range of different situations. So capacity building is in the end in this diagram, but it doesn't necessarily has to be there. Of course, the capacity building can be already a part of the co-design. If you're offering prototypes, you probably have to perform some kind of capacity building to provide users the minimal capacity to actually explore these solutions and get some results from it. So it can be a part of it. On the other hand, the co-design can also inform a more wide capacity building activity that could come in the end. It differs if you have a very large community of users, you probably won't be involving all of them in the co-design part, in the phase. But of course, once you discuss with these users and you understand that you will be dealing with this large community of users, you have to understand their profile, their level of understanding of this kind of solutions, the kind of resources they have available, so that you can actually proceed to the capacity building phase. So the co-design can either be already a part of capacity building, I would say, or it can really inform the capacity building in a more focus, as a more focused activity that comes in the end. If you have a more complex setup with more users, or maybe just more different users, more variety among your user community, then you might need this capacity building phase, and then you need to understand how you can build that. So co-design is not only to co-design the prototypes and the actual solution in the end, but even to co-design how the solution will be used. So in that sense, co-design will also co-design the capacity building phase, if you were talking about something that's more complex, for sure.
Thanks for that.
Fantastic. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to ask Pedro? Oh, hi, James.
Hiya. Excellent talk, Pedro. Thank you. That was fascinating. And it makes me very happy to hear you talking about this, because I completely agree that it's essential if these tools are going to be used, that the user is the boss. My question is about agile project management, basically. Do you find that the context in which you're developing these kind of tools changes during the course of a project, either because maybe the software platforms change, or the user needs change? And if so, do you follow an agile project management approach?
That's actually an excellent question, James, because that's exactly what I'm trying to focus right now, how to combine this framework of participatory design with the agile development, which is so common in software development, something that everybody talks about. It's a challenge. It's not so easy, because on one side, agile try to make things very short and very shorter cycles, very quick. And co-design is very hard to do in such a way. You need the community, you need to organize, you need to perform simulations. So it takes time to do that. On the other hand, of course, both things are connected, because if you're using prototypes in co-design, and if you want to have cycles of co-design, you will need to have development cycles within those co-design cycles. So you need to alternate these co-design cycles with agile development cycles. Or you can actually insert co-design, so include co-design in the agile cycle. It's going to make it more complicated, because it's automatically becomes more people, more time, more resources being consumed. So it's maybe not so agile. But on the other hand, you are actually able to include the users. So one suggestion I would make is to start with a more very hard co-design activity, longer discussions with a lot of telling at the States. Is much more on the telling phase, where just people conceptualizing things and how they want to use and trying to express their needs. You take this for a longer initial phase. After that, you develop a first batch of solutions in an agile framework. But then you enter what I would say is a agile improvement co-design or something like that. So you enter some cycles where you actually include the users in the agile development, but then for small improvements. So we start with a longer co-design for an initial, I would say, minimal viable product. And once you have that, you can go back to the co-design, of course, with this prototype. But then you find that there is a need to make small improvements. And this can be done in a kind of agile framework. So you iterate these cycles where you develop things very quickly, small parts, but then you include the users at some stage, evaluating those prototypes, those improvements. So it's quite interesting actually to try to merge these two topics, which is not so easy. Both are topics that have originated in software design, so they should be harmonized somehow. And that's actually what I'm trying to look at right now.
Awesome, thank you.
Fantastic. Well, if there's no more questions, maybe we should move on to Peter Miller's presentation. Peter Miller works at Plymouth Marine Laboratory and he leads our work on co-design for NextOcean. So he'll be telling you a little bit how we've approached this within our project.
Hi there, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Let me just welcome to our webinar. I'm glad you could come. So my part of the webinar is talking about how we've applied NextOcean co-design principles, how we've applied those principles within the NextOcean project. So putting together some of the strategies that Pedro nicely covered. So today I'll be talking about what strategies we've decided to use, and a little bit about the workshops that we've started to deliver as part of our NextOcean project. From the first one, I'll tell you about some of the lessons we've learned that might be useful for other people planning similar activities. And then I'd like this to be interactive as possible. So at the end of my section, I'll be inviting people to use the Slido tool to give your views, and we can have some voting on the best ways of doing co-design. So I'll give you instructions for that in a minute. So let's start with something about the strategies. So with co-design, the process involves at least these 4 activities. Firstly, to engage with all kinds of stakeholders so that we can learn from each other. And then we need to sit down with them and plan different kinds of activities that help us understand the user's problems and needs. And that process is critical so that we can get insights from everyone that's taken the time to be involved. From that understanding, getting people together in that way often raises new ideas about how we can advance the service that we'd like to deliver. And even with the people there, we can develop prototypes, test out ideas on the intended users. And that's really vital to give us a service that is needed by those end users and even worthy of purchasing in the future. So the final part is to use that co-design to validate those methods. So if we have a new concept or a new product, then we can present it, we can test it out with those users, and they can help us evaluate, prioritize our work for developing the final service. So what we've done is to take some ideas from the literature on co-design, and one of them that I found useful was how to plan for a co-design workshop, and this is by Stefan Holmlid. And he laid it out as 3 stages. Before you get to the workshop, you want to pin down what you're hoping to get out of that workshop. And then probably the most time-consuming part is developing what he calls probes to get people in the position where they're understanding what information you want from them, and in the right mindset to be communicating with you, and make that as creative and playful, enjoyable as you can, so that they're happy to be there. And also, even before you start, you need to plan how you're going to follow up on this workshop. So when you actually get to the days before the workshop, then you can what you call sensitize. You can provide some written materials to tell people about the project, what we're hoping to get out of it, and this helps get them to the right mindset of being ready to co-design and co-create. So what people actually think of the workshop is the making and discussing part, where we have brainstorming sessions or kind of game scenarios where we might together discuss and evolve ideas about the kind of service we want. I should explain that for NextOcean in particular, we're trying to develop services, and I'll describe that in a minute, based on satellite data. And lots of discussing, there's different ways that we can structure discussions. Critical is stage 3, which is really the work of the facilitators for that workshop, is while the workshop is happening, is to analyze all this information that's coming out and to start grouping things together, pulling out common threads and ideas. And then once the facilitator thinks that they see and understand what the users are trying to tell us, then to share that back. And that's really good feedback loop, where we iterate towards an understanding and an improved understanding of what the users need. And then that can lead on to actually proposing new methodologies, new additions to services or products that will really help. So that's the idea. I've got a bit more kind of theory here that's I'll briefly touch on, but I won't really. Just to say that there's a whole literature and guidebooks on how to best plan these activities. So the first thing is to realize that co-design can be used in different ways, different purposes. You can use it to generate insights about what people are after. You can use it to explore concepts, like you can even, once you've got a concept, you can discuss it with people to bring people's different ideas and priorities together, so that you get towards a specification of something that you could actually design as a service. And then once the service is implemented, then transforming that to a usable service where people are prepared to make use of it. So those are the why of why you're doing co-design. Then there's what you're going to do in co-design, and how you're going to do it. So in terms of what, there's kind of dialogues you can do. You can prototype things. I won't go into all of these, but yeah, you can ask people to improvise, like a use case of how what an ideal product would look like. The idea is to be, as I said, enjoyable, creative. So how we do this is down to the facilitators, and to make sure there's an open dialogue, for instance, and that you're really encouraging everyone to participate, to get the most out of that time and out of the expertise of everyone that's taken the time to attend. So it gives you a little idea of what was in our minds when we were planning this project. So as I said, for NextOcean, we're looking at designing services based on Earth observation data usually from satellites, looking at the ocean and the coast. And this is based on these 4 areas where we believe there's a need and a justification for developing new services. And one is on monitoring aquaculture that's happening, for instance, these caged fish farms. Another one is where it's planning new aquaculture farms. Then on to fishing, capture fishing. There's various user groups interested in monitoring fishing activities and their impact. For instance, surveillance and illegal fishing, that kind of thing. And final one is on sustainable trade, to do with the, the eco-friendly side of fishing. So that could be in terms of the provenance of, where the fish are caught. Is that in the right areas? Is that with the right fishing gear? And labeling that for consumer interest. So there's all kinds of products and services that could be designed within this scope of our project. So the purpose of the co-design is to find out what are people's unsolved problems, because there's no point if they've really got a perfectly good solution for one of their business needs. How are their existing services limited? What properties they think of would be desirable? What would be a unique selling point, that kind of thing. And then it's clear that as you reach out to people, different groups of end users have different needs depending on their region and their particular business sector. So there's all these mixed bag of ideas that can come into a co-design. So that's a little bit about the strategies. So what did we actually decide to do? So our first workshop was in January, and the idea was, because of our COVID situation that was in place by then, we realized we couldn't have an in-person meeting. So we planned instead to have an online meeting. It would have been good. Most of the practice and theory of co-design is based on meeting people face to face in a room where you can really get into excellent conversations. So we needed to work out how to replicate as much of that as possible with an online platform. So we decided who to invite, and a whole range of participants. 34 participants from 5 different countries were attending on that morning, and it took place over about 3 hours one morning. And we made use of a tool called Miro that some of you may have come across. If not, it's quite far along the lines of a brainstorming session, but making use of the online internet technology as best we can. So here's a glance at the kind of board that we had. I won't kind of zoom into too much because we're still working through the outcomes from this particular workshop. But the idea is that we had different brainstorming sessions where we looked at what products people were using already, what were the limitations of those, as I said, what new aspects of those services would they like. And I'll tell you a bit more about these trees in a minute. So that was one tool we used. Another one we found very useful was Slido. And so there we could ask people questions and get people's instant views on things if they hadn't been able to communicate those in the breakout groups. Oh yeah, I should have said that we divided these 34 people into 3 breakout groups, which made it much more open, more encouraging for people in smaller groups to give us an idea of their user needs and to get some useful discussions going. So yeah, we noted down as much as we could from these sessions in these post-it notes that everyone online could do, and we could facilitate. We had facilitators in each breakout room. And then since then, what we've been doing is quite a detailed task of pulling out all of the interesting information, all of the priorities, trying to group things together. You might have seen on this board that there's rings around things to group together similar ideas so that we can pull together what were the priorities for people. And we were quite successful in getting a good cross-section of the different business sectors. So we had people involved in Earth observation itself, but also on the science of oceanography. But we had companies involved in aquaculture and fishing, consulting companies, maritime, environmental management, service development, and even spatial planning. So these were exactly the target users that we wanted to reach out to. So just to focus in on problem trees, we found this a useful, one of these probing tools for getting people to think about their own problem. So for instance, if there's illegal fishing happening in their area is a problem, then we ask people to identify what they saw as the root causes of that and the consequences of that. And then I won't go into the full explanation of this, but the idea is that this helps you reach out and identify potential solutions to this problem. And then that can help move people's attention towards the services that would help address that solution. So that was a quick summary of what happened in that workshop, and some of that information for those of you that were at the co-design workshop, maybe a couple of you were there. We're putting together a summary of that outcome so that we can communicate that back and get people's feedback on what we learned from that workshop. So that will be coming out in the coming weeks. So the lessons learned from that, we want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to speak and participate. And of course, that would have been easier to ensure face-to-face. But we did what we could in the online session, but particularly if people aren't happy to put their cameras on, that can be a problem to know who's speaking and who hasn't spoken. So yeah, the facilitators should encourage people to make it as near to a face-to-face as you can. So small groups does help with that, and you can use different methods to allow people to speak or to write down the post-it notes. So the facilitators can write down ideas that people would just speak, or they can write them themselves. And there's a lot that depends on the expertise of the facilitator to make this happen and to make this a really positive time with the end users. So next one is timekeeping and coordination between those breakout groups. We found quite a challenge online because we couldn't see the other groups, what stage people are up to. So if people are doing this online, you really need to have good intergroup communication to make sure that everyone's keeping on track with the tasks, so that you can maximize that time you have together. It's good to get kind of ownership of the ideas that come out, so that you then know who to talk to follow up on those ideas later. So we've done that where possible. Also, that was slightly hampered by the online environment. And yeah, with the outcomes, you then want to feed back those findings to the participants, and we're in the process of progressing with that task. I've told you about the virtual tools. That's fine if people are computer savvy. Some people have more of a familiarization problem with the tools, and more or less happy to log on to things and to write comments and to draw arrows and really use it to communicate their thoughts in the best way possible. So yeah, you need to be attentive of those potential barriers to communication when you're doing these things online, which I guess post-COVID we seem to be limiting our traveling for the sake of the planet as well. So this is not something that's going to go away. So co-design needs to really encompass the virtual ways of doing things. So that's enough for me talking. Now let's get your views. So Dawn will be posting a link into the chat, or you can get out your mobile phone now, put the camera on and scan this QR code, which will also take you to the same place. What I'd like, if you can, maybe if you can put a little thumbs up in the Zoom chat when you found your way to the Slido page, just to know that. Or I could type a yes on there in the chat or something. I can actually see that. So if Dawn, if you could let me know if there are people that are finding their way, I'll go to the first question. So you should see on your mobile phone or on your web page, whichever way you want to do it, you should see the first question. So this question is for anyone, whether you've already been to co-design or stakeholder discussion events, or for those that haven't and you still have a view on what might work best for you. So here's some choices as to what kind of setup do you think works best for a co-design event? So I've spoken a bit about a virtual event and in-person events. You could also do things as a hybrid. So you get like one room with some people in one country and some people online and some people in a room together in another country. So you could bring together kind of virtual rooms which each have physical people in person. So there's a hybrid way of doing things. Also, you can do things one-to-one. You can meet someone in person, or you can meet someone one-to-one virtually. So if I give you just another minute, another few seconds. I think most of you have voted. I can count 9 people, there we go. So you can still vote while I show the results. So possibly, as expected, most people would like to be in the same room as people and have the full range of your senses that are available in a in-person workshop. It's interesting that you like the sound of a hybrid workshop. So that's one for us to follow up on, because we held back from doing that due to kind of practical reasons, that it's not very easy for everyone to set up the same environments in each country, but certainly it can be done effectively. Yeah, one-to-one meetings, we're definitely going to do more of that in NextOcean. So it's interesting that you agree that that's a good approach. So that's good. So let's move on to the next question. Thanks for that. There's only a few questions. So I don't think I'm going to keep you here for hours. So what's the best ways to allocate participants? So if you have, say you have 30 people at a co-design event, what are the best ways of grouping people together to make smaller groups? You could do it at random. You could do it by what sector of the industry they are. Like for our project, we have fisheries and aquaculture as two distinct sectors. But also some people might have different languages they're happy and comfortable to be talking in. So that could be a one way to organize this, but yeah, and then like geographic region, people have different priorities, different regions. So I'd be interested to get your views on which way is best for that. Yeah, I should have said for the first one that you can, yeah, you can select as many as you like before you click the button. I didn't properly explain the rules there. So you can, the first one that you select is the one that you think is the best, and then you can select as many others, second choice, third choice, and it shows you 1, 2, 3. So you can select all of them and then press send at the end. So I think so. Just wait for. I'll show you the results while the last people. So here's our results. Thank you for voting on that. So that's interesting, because that's the way. Possibly not surprising, because we're a small group, and but yeah, it's interesting that you agree with us, because this was our plan for the first co-design workshop, that we divide things according to the sector that people were involved in. And yeah, there can certainly be different groups of people, and they might talk a different language, so it could work well. It could be a benefit to have those kind of people talking together. But then again, sometimes you might appreciate completely different viewpoints in the same room. So and then geographical region. Yeah, language, we thought there might be a few ethical issues in dividing people up by different language, but yeah, I think this is good information. Thanks for giving your views on this. The final question is an open text question, where I'd like you to jot in some of your thoughts on co-design. So this could be your experience of what has worked well in any co-design or stakeholder type of events that you found useful. So you could also put in, as long as you identify, you could say, definitely don't do this. But yeah, I'll assume that any ideas you put down are things that you want to recommend to others. So it could be like what kind of tools that we use, what strategies, what online, what online tools or tricks we use to get people to engage and to be creative. So we've got ideas coming through now. I suspect longer term learning exchanges, sabbaticals, comments. Wow, that's something we would love to have time for, to do longer term exchanges. That's a nice thought, though. yeah, make sure you've kind of tagged everyone, that everyone's had a chance to contribute. Functional prototypes is very important. So focusing on a role-playing, focusing on a real-world challenge. Yeah, this is something that I'm hoping to do when we have an in-person co-design event. User experience design methodology. Well, that's helpful, because I certainly don't know all of the literature. Thank you. A critical mass of end users. This is someone that's within our project. So we had a first set of end users, and we also had people from our own project. So now that we have something closer to a product to try out on people, then we want to start reaching out towards the potential customers, because they will have the clearest views on what they would like, and whether we are starting to deliver things that could be of interest to them. So I'll tie up my presentation to give us a few minutes to discuss. So this is what I've spoken about, and I'd just like to finish by inviting people that aren't already within our project, if they'd be interested in participating in our co-design events for NextOcean. So if so, please give your name and email address. Or you can also go to our website, which is nextocean.eu, and sign up to stay up to date there. I'd like to now open up the meeting and ask for any questions on that talk and any wider discussion points. James asked a question. Do you want to speak that out, James, rather than me reading it?
Sure. So I was just wondering, when you asked about what's the best way to group participants, is it according to the sector, geography, first language, etc.? I was wondering if you were asking, should the participants be segregated according to those factors, or pooled according to those factors, so that the groups are all NGOs working in, pelagic fisheries, or if you want to take different people from different groups and throw them together? And I guess the answer is it depends.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I was suggesting that you should aggregate them according to those categories. Yeah, but that in some ways it's good to certainly, if people are from the same organization, you'd like to split those up so that you don't get kind of organizational thinking, with a party line and everyone saying the same thing. So yeah, a bit of separation, a bit of segregation is needed. But yeah, I think it's trying to say, yeah, should you aggregate people from one area, or should you? But that's a good point. Hopefully it was clear which one I was asking people for, because that would give a completely different answer if it was the other way around. Yes, so hopefully people got the idea that. Thanks, Sylvia. I'm sorry I spoke for a bit long to not give us time for discussion. But we're still here for a few minutes. If people would like to raise queries, I can show the outcomes of that question. That might give people some more thoughts. If I just go back to that slide.
Peter, I found it really, really interesting that people put the hybrid meeting as their second option.
Oh, yeah.
I I know you got really far along with your plans of the sort of distributed co-design workshop before we were stopped by COVID. I just wondered if you wanted to explain how you thought that was going to work, and if people thought that'd be a useful model for future co-design workshops.
Yeah, I think a hybrid workshop would have some advantages, but many ways it can go wrong. to be brutally honest, because it needs to be a similar experience in each of the hybrid locations. So that needs a lot more pre-planning.
Yeah, maybe people aren't quite aware what you was planning was to have like people in different physical locations and different groups, and then all join together online. But there'll be like a group in Lisbon, a group in Plymouth, and they'll be discussing the same things. And I thought that was quite an interesting model, how you were planning on doing that.
Yeah, we will probably attempt that for the next workshop, because we are planning for it to be in person in a country. Athens was mentioned, Dionysia, previously as a potential place to do that. So we would gather that group of end users involved in the Greek fishing and aquaculture industry, but also we would make it available online, so it would become a hybrid event through that. However, the pitfalls there is that the people joining online don't have the same experience as the ones in the room, so there's kind of expectation management there to be aware of. Question from Jean-Pierre. Yes, we planned several more co-design workshops. Oh, is he left already?
Yeah.
But yeah, to answer his question for the recording, Jean-Pierre asked, do you plan a new co-design workshop? So yeah, I should have said, perhaps it's prompted me that we're planning one in September, October time this year, and then there'll be more events further on. So yeah, and yeah, happy to talk about. Oh yeah, is whoever mentioned functional prototypes able to give me a bit more information about that?
Actually, I was the one that mentioned that, Peter.
Yeah.
So it's just because of my experience, people were kind of tired of looking at PowerPoints and looking at these plans, and they actually want to have things that they can interact. They can go to a website and download something and look at that. So I know it's challenging. It's like I was saying before to James, it is challenging because you have to have some sort of co-design prior to that, prior to development of any prototype. But I guess in NextOcean, we are now on the stage that we should have these products coming in the coming months. So for sure, this will help. In my opinion, this will help on the next workshops with users.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks for explaining. So yeah, it's been very helpful for me and for the project to get people's views on co-design. So just to summarize, thank you very much. I hope people have got a better idea about the co-design activities that we've been planning and delivering in NextOcean, and I hope you can be participating in that as we move forward towards our NextOcean services. So thanks everyone, and thank you for coming today.